The forest around Blackthorn Vale was quiet that morning, the kind of quiet that comes before something important happens. Lyra Sinclair knelt beside a small stream, washing crushed herbs in the cold water, when she heard the sound of horses approaching. She did not need to look up to know they were royal guards. Only the king's men rode horses with silver bells on their reins, a sound that carried through the trees like a warning. She stood slowly, wiping her hands on her apron, and waited. 3 riders came into view, dressed in the deep blue and silver of the royal house. The one in front, a tall woman with sharp eyes, dismounted first. "Lyra Sinclair," the woman said, "you are summoned to the royal court. The king wishes to see you." Lyra's stomach tightened. She had heard the rumors, of course. Everyone in the border packs had heard them. A healer from a small village, marked with a crescent-shaped scar on her wrist, the same mark said to appear only on a wolf's true mate. She had always thought it was nonsense, an old story parents told their children, but apparently, the king's advisors did not think it was nonsense at all. "I have patients to see," Lyra said carefully. "People who are sick. I cannot simply leave." "The king insists," the guard replied, her tone leaving no room for argument. Lyra looked back toward her small cottage, where jars of dried herbs lined the windowsill, and a fire still burned low in the hearth. She thought of her mother, who had raised her alone after her father left them both for a life of power and politics. She thought of the promise she had made to herself years ago, that she would never let anyone use her the way her father had used her mother. But refusing a direct summons from the Alpha King was not something anyone in the kingdom dared to do. She climbed onto the horse they offered her, and they rode toward the capital. The royal court of Blackthorn Vale was unlike anything Lyra had ever seen. Towering stone walls rose around a courtyard filled with nobles in fine clothing, all of them turning to stare as she was led inside. Whispers followed her every step. She kept her chin high, though her heart pounded beneath her plain healer's dress. At the far end of the great hall stood King Draven Ashwood. He was younger than she expected, though his presence filled the room in a way that made him seem older, heavier, more permanent than stone. His dark hair was pushed back from his face, and his eyes, a pale gold that seemed to catch the light strangely, fixed on her the moment she entered. The court fell silent. Draven stepped down from the raised platform where his throne sat, and walked toward her, and Lyra felt something strange stir in her chest, a pull she could not explain, like a string tied somewhere deep inside her had suddenly gone tight. "You are the healer from the border village," he said. It was not a question. "I am," Lyra answered. He reached for her hand, gently, and turned her wrist so the crescent scar was visible to the entire court. A murmur rippled through the nobles. "For 100 years, my wolf has been silent," Draven said, his voice carrying through the hall. No howl, no pull toward any woman in this kingdom or beyond it, until 3 nights ago, when I felt it, when I felt you. He looked at her, and for a moment, something almost vulnerable crossed his face. "You are my mate." The words hung in the air. Every noble in the hall watched, waiting for Lyra to fall to her knees in gratitude, to weep with joy at being chosen by the most powerful man in the kingdom. Instead, Lyra pulled her hand back. "I am sorry, Your Majesty," she said, her voice steady despite the way her heart raced. "But I do not accept." The silence that followed was so complete that Lyra could hear her own breath. "You refuse me," Draven said slowly, as if trying to understand words in a language he did not know. "I refuse to be chosen without being asked," Lyra said. "You did not ask me anything. You simply declared it in front of your entire court, as though I am a piece of land to be claimed." She glanced around at the watching nobles, then back at him. "I have spent my whole life watching what power does to people. My father left my mother for ambition. My betrothed, before I broke it off, saw me only as a way to gain favor with his family. I will not spend my life as someone's prize, even if fate itself marked my wrist to make it happen." Draven's jaw tightened. "This is not about ambition. This is fate." "Then fate should have asked me first," Lyra said quietly. She turned, and before any guard could stop her, she walked out of the great hall, out through the courtyard, past the staring nobles, and did not look back until she was well beyond the city gates. That night, something happened in Blackthorn Vale that no one alive had ever witnessed. King Draven, alone in his chambers, felt something break inside his chest. A wall he had built so long ago he had forgotten it was there. His wolf, silent and controlled for 100 years, tore free from him, with a force he could not stop. He staggered onto the balcony, and the howl that left him was not the howl of a king. It was raw, aching, filled with grief and confusion, and something that sounded, to anyone who heard it, remarkably like regret. The sound rolled across the capital, over the rooftops, through the forests, past the borders of every packed territory in the kingdom. In villages miles away, people woke from sleep, startled, some frightened, some simply staring out their windows into the dark, wondering what had happened to shake the very air around them. In her small cottage, Lyra sat up in bed, her heart pounding, tears rising in her eyes, though she did not understand why. She pressed her hand against her chest, against the ache that had settled there the moment she heard the sound, and she did not sleep again that night. By morning, the story had already spread through every corner of the kingdom. The untouchable Alpha King, the man whose wolf had never howled for anyone, had been rejected by a simple healer, and his grief had shaken the land itself. Lyra expected punishment. She expected guards at her door, demanding she return to the capital, or worse. Instead, 3 days passed in silence. On the 4th day, a single rider approached her cottage. Not a royal guard, not a noble. King Draven himself, dressed in plain traveling clothes, without a crown, without an escort. Lyra stood in her doorway, arms crossed, watching him dismount. "I am not here to command you," he said, before she could speak. "I only ask if I might talk with you. As myself, not as a king." She studied him for a long moment. There was something different in his eyes now, something that had not been there in the great hall, a kind of humility she had not expected from a man raised to believe the world belonged to him. "You may sit," she said finally, gesturing to the bench outside her cottage, "but I have patients waiting. You will have to talk quickly." He almost smiled at that. "Then let me help you see them. I have some skill with wounds, from battle. Perhaps I can be useful instead of simply talking." Lyra hesitated, then nodded, mostly out of curiosity to see if he was serious. He was. Over the following days, Draven returned again and again, always without his crown, always asking rather than demanding. He helped Lyra tend to villagers suffering from a fever that had swept through the border settlements, carrying water, holding down feverish patients so she could apply cooling herbs, sitting through long nights beside sick children so their exhausted parents could rest. He never mentioned the mate bond. He never brought up the crescent scar. He simply worked and listened, and slowly, Lyra found herself looking forward to the sound of his horse approaching each morning. One evening, as they sat by the fire after a long day of treating patients, Draven spoke quietly. "My father taught me that love was something to be commanded," he said. "That a king takes what he wants, and the kingdom follows. I believed it, because I never knew anything different. When my wolf finally howled, I thought it meant I had found what I was owed." He looked at her, firelight catching the gold in his eyes. "I understand now that I was wrong. Fate may have marked us both, but it does not owe me your heart. I have to earn it, the same as any other man." Lyra said nothing for a long moment, watching the fire crackle between them. "That is the first true thing you have said to me," she finally replied. Weeks passed. Draven continued his visits, and slowly, without either of them announcing it, something shifted between them. Lyra found herself laughing at his terrible jokes about court life, and Draven found himself listening more than he spoke, something no noble in his court had ever managed to teach him. But peace rarely lasts long in a kingdom. Word had spread beyond Blackthorn Vale's borders that the Alpha King's mate had rejected him, and that his control over his own wolf had weakened because of it. A rival kingdom, sensing opportunity, gathered forces along the eastern border, hoping to strike while Draven was believed to be distracted and vulnerable. When news of the approaching army reached the border village, panic spread quickly. Lyra worked through the night preparing medical supplies, expecting the worst, while Draven rode out to rally his warriors. Before he left, he came to find her one final time. "You do not have to come," he said. "I would never ask that of you." Lyra looked at him, at the man who had spent weeks proving himself through action rather than title, who had never once tried to force the bond between them, who had earned something from her that no crown could have demanded. "I am not coming because you asked," she said. "I am coming because I choose to." The battle that followed was fierce, but Blackthorn Vale's warriors, led by a king fighting not for pride, but for the people, and the woman he had come to truly love, pushed back the invading forces within a single day. Lyra worked at the edge of the battlefield, tending to wounded warriors from both sides, her hands steady, even as fear gripped her heart every time Draven disappeared from her sight. When it was over, and the enemy forces retreated, Draven found her kneeling beside a wounded soldier, her healer's hands covered in dried herbs and blood, exhaustion written across her face. He knelt beside her without a word, and simply helped her finish binding the man's wounds. That night, under a sky full of stars, with the sounds of the recovering camp behind them, Draven finally spoke the words he had been holding back for weeks. "I am not asking as a king," he said, kneeling before her. "No crown, no court, no audience of watching nobles. I am asking as a man who has learned that love cannot be commanded, only offered and accepted freely. Lyra Sinclair, will you choose me, not because fate marked us, but because you want to?" Lyra looked at him for a long moment, remembering the girl who had once sworn never to be anyone's prize, remembering the fear that had driven her to walk out of that great hall weeks ago. But this was not the same man who had declared her his mate in front of a watching court. This was a man who had ridden to her village without a crown, who had spent long nights holding sick children, who had learned, slowly and honestly, what it meant to earn something, rather than simply take it. "Yes," she said quietly, "I choose you." The kingdom remembered that night for many years afterward, though the story that spread was never quite accurate. Some said the king's wolf howled again that night, louder even than before, though this time filled with joy instead of grief. Others said the howl was never heard again at all, because for the first time in his long life, the king finally had everything he had once howled for, and a heart at peace does not need to cry out into the dark. Whatever the truth, the tale of the healer who rejected the Alpha King first, and the king who learned to earn her heart instead of demanding it, became one of the most beloved stories told throughout Blackthorn Vale for generations to come.